Recording. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along on a very sunny evening and giving up your time. Welcome to our final session of the series of youth work and schools. Can I just say thank you to, we've got a representation from Inverclyde Council and Renfrewshire today, who are going to take you through their experience of being part of the collaborative the inquiry process that was run in partnership with Education Scotland. And we have John Galt with us today and Jill Gracie from YouthLink Scotland as well. I am going to pass over to them and go on mute now.
Thanks, Kat. I'm just going to try and share a few of these slides. The main purpose of this afternoon is to hear from the partners who've kindly joined us on the call, but we've got a little bit of introduction to do. So I think actually I recognise all the names of people that are on the call. So I'm guessing that you've been to at least one of the previous sessions. This is the third of 3 sessions, and the particular focus this afternoon is a collaborative approach to self-evaluation between youth work and school partners. And it's following 2 sessions. The first one was around establishing partnerships, and the second one was around the evaluation of youth work and school partnerships. So you'll remember that all of this is kind of based around a piece of work that happened over the course of last school session that involved 7 youth work and school partnerships from across the West region. And the partners that we have here today are those who are involved in the partnership with Inverclyde Academy, and then the Evolve programme in Renfrewshire. And we have we've got Gail, the head teacher from Castlehead High School, who's with us today as well. And so in terms of today, what we're aiming to do is to give you a kind of brief opportunity, I guess, to think about your own experience of collaborative self-evaluation, particularly where that's around partnership work. We want to share a bit of detail around the self-evaluation process that we co-designed together with practitioners through the collaborative inquiry last year. The bulk of the time will be spent hearing from the youth work and school partnerships that are here today, and their kind of sense of what it was like to be part of that collaborative inquiry process and evaluate work together. And then there'll be a wee opportunity towards the end for some questions and discussion. So first of all, I'm just going to pass across to John to do a little bit of that kind of reflection of your own before we get started. John.
Thanks, Jill, and afternoon, everybody. So as Jill said, we're going to focus on the shared self-evaluation element of the partnerships that were involved in the collaborative, and we're going to hear from Inverclyde Academy and from the schools and youth work colleagues in Renfrewshire in a minute. But just as a kind of kick-off, we wanted you to think about your own experiences of shared self-evaluation. So I think we'd probably assume that most people on the call are familiar with the process of self-evaluation and using that to inform how you improve your work. But if we were to ask you to what extent you're regularly involving or working with other partners when you're undergoing your self-evaluation, either from a school perspective or from a youth work perspective, be interested to get your feedback on that. So we could start with that one, and just if you wanted to put in the chat, just on a scale between 1 and 10, how regularly would your self-evaluation involve working with other partners out with your own establishment or organisation? So I see there's a couple of people typing. Okay, Mrs. Burnick goes right down the middle and gives herself a 5 out of 10. While the rest of you are thinking about that, because this is just a brief introduction, think about that second question. In your own experience, what are the building blocks of good shared self-evaluation, and other things in your own experience you've found that are challenging or tricky in terms of working with other establishments or organisations when you're self-evaluating? So again, you can stick the odd word in the chat around that, or if you want, if you're brave enough to come in, then feel free to do so. Okay, so Susan's saying it's difficult to put a numeric value on it, depends on the relationships. Generally higher than 5. Good stuff, Susan. Glad to hear it. Especially as we're going to hear from your own experience in this process later on, so that's great. So any other thoughts on that thing about, what are the building blocks of good shared self-evaluation, and are any particular challenges? Gail, thanks, you've come in. What works well? Discussion about desired outcomes, and it's moved up. Discussion about desired outcomes, as this often helps identify inputs. Absolutely. Mrs. Bray said joint plannings at the start of the process is key. So great. That'll depend on how high the grade is. I think that's what you're saying. Absolutely. So that it's not involving partners at the end or halfway through a process. It's starting from that at the beginning. And Michelle, I think the challenge is to use the same language, agreed outcomes that all parties are happy with. Absolutely. And for those of you who were at our first session, you remember we did have a look, didn't we, about the challenges of shared terminology and language between youth work and school partnerships, and how we can maybe break down some of the kind of the barriers around about that. Okay, so a few thoughts on that, and what we're going to hear, as we say, a bit more from our partners in a while in terms of their own experiences of that. But Jill, shall we keep going? Pass back to yourself.
Thanks, John. That's great. I'm just going to do a little bit of input myself around what came from that evaluation process through the collaborative inquiry, but also how that was designed, because really importantly, it was designed with teachers and youth work practitioners. So, John, can you see that screen all right? It's okay.
Yes. Yep.
So just, I guess, to clarify what we wanted to do in terms of focus around that piece of self-evaluation last year. We wanted to look across the partnerships and be able to highlight what was working well. We wanted to build a picture of impact and what works well from young people's perspectives. We wanted opportunities to really dig into some of the barriers and enablers of effective collaboration. And we wanted to identify opportunities for collaborative self-improvement. So I suppose really importantly, it was about a self-evaluation that would then lead to onward action. That was what would make it a worthwhile process. And together, as I said, practitioners from the youth work teams and also from the school perspective, put together a set of it was almost like sort of territory that we wanted to cover through the self-evaluation. So first of all, we had a set of questions for partners and adult stakeholders, and you can see some of those were quite strategic and others of those were much more around the nuts and bolts of the process. For collaboration, there was a focus on evaluating impact and the methodologies that people were using around that, and also aspirations for the partnership. And each of the partnerships decided who were the key stakeholders they wanted to hear from in each case. And often that was about teaching staff across the school, but it was also about parents, carers, and sometimes other partners who were working alongside the youth work teams in the school. And then really importantly, we also looked at how could we really kind of hear from young people through the self-evaluation process. And we came up with, again, it wasn't a kind of set of formal questions. There was an understanding that we would need to do this in different ways with the different groups of young people, depending on where they were at. But we had a kind of common set of things that we wanted to look at with young people. So in particular, we wanted to hear about how young people saw youth work relative to school. We wanted to hear how young people felt they were able to shape the youth work opportunities that they were offered, and we wanted to hear from them on the impact of being, having access to youth work in and around the school community. And again, in each context, the youth workers and the teachers took different approaches to hearing about those areas from the young people. And we covered this in detail in the last session, so apologies if you weren't here for that, but we also wanted to look at impact both quantitatively and qualitatively, and we used the youth work skills framework as a way of creating a kind of common focus and language around that. And we cover, if you weren't able to be at the session about that, the slides and the detail from that is available. And Kat, I think people can get that. Can they get that from your website now, or where are the slides from the previous sessions?
They're not on the website, but we can post it. We can mail them out to everybody, and it can go onto the website.
Amazing, that's great. So maybe after this, we'll just send the whole kind of set of slides, and people can look through them. That's brilliant. Thank you. And so what came from that, and it was, I mean, we were really lucky in this process, because not only was there a really detailed and compelling bit of self-evaluation in each of the partnerships, but we were able to look across the partnerships and see what was common. And there were some really strong messages about the value of youth work partnerships with schools. So something about that unique pedagogy that is the youth work approach, and the different skills that youth workers can bring that complement what's there in the school already. There was some really interesting stuff around school culture and ethos, both around how that's an enabler of a youth work approach, but also how the youth work approach then has an impact in growing that culture of kind of hearing from young people and nurturing young people in the school. And lots of stuff around how youth work is really helping to make those connections between school and home and community, and a real sense of mutual respect about the knowledge and skills that youth workers are bringing, and where teachers can learn from them, and also vice versa, that there was lots of learning happening between the partners, and really strong feedback from young people about the complementariness of youth work in the school setting. We were able to draw out in the full report. There's a slide that comes later that's got where you can find all the detail of this. So the full report's got lots more detail on this. But in terms of enablers and challenges of effective partnership, there was a lot of interesting conversation around how leadership and the prevailing school culture can be an enabler and also a barrier in some cases to really effective partnerships. That kind of relational approach being key, and the importance of the kind of trust and respect for the difference that each of the partners is bringing. real clarity of purpose. I think that came up in some of the responses to John's questions, and that kind of clarity about what is it we're setting out to do, and really the discipline of that joint planning, ongoing review and evaluation being critical, and particularly making sure that that's genuinely informed by feedback from young people. In terms of the challenges, I think there was a common one around funding. A lot of the school SLT contributors saying, that it's a challenge for them, different models of funding, but it's a challenge for them when they can't be sure that there's sustainability of funding around youth work contribution, and obviously that works from a youth work perspective as well. That there is sometimes patchy awareness of the value and the impact of the youth work contribution in the school setting, and kind of thinking about how, they're often one or two really important relationships that youth work teams are relying on in the schools, but how is that kind of value and impact shared more widely so that everyone across the staff team gets what it's all about. And then the fact that discipline around joint planning and ongoing review and evaluation is actually a challenge in the busyness of the school year, and how you make sure that you're able to do that together. And also that bit about how you go from just evaluating to then using what you've learned to inform service improvement, and that being sometimes a challenge also, just making sure that what you're learning is then put into practice for the future. And just really briefly, and again, more on this at the last session, but we were able to pull together some pretty impressive statistics showing the impact of partnership working across the different partnerships that were involved in the inquiry process. So as a kind of overview of what we were able to gather through the self-evaluation process, all of those resources. So we have some really nice storyboards from each of the partnerships, which are up on the West Partnership website at the moment. You'll find the full report from that piece of joint self-evaluation on the YouthLink Scotland website. And we also have some resources to support practice up there as well. So you can access all of those through the links on those slides. But the important bit today really is to hear from the partners who were involved directly in gathering the data and being part of the self-evaluation conversation, really. And before we do that, I just wanted to give both Renfrewshire and Inverclyde an opportunity to just say a very short bit about what their partnership looks like. So this piece of work was focused on one particular partnership or one particular programme, so it's probably helpful just to have a sense of what that looked like in each of those areas before we get into questions around the process. So I think Renfrewshire, you're up first. Susan, Gail, if you want to just say a little bit about the Evolve programme, and so that people have a sense of the context that we were evaluating in.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Jill. The Evolve programme was initially a cashback funded programme, which was a part of a 3-year pilot. So we were very fortunate in the circumstances to be able to have the resources there for the young people to make it such a flexible programme and relevant in that we could provide the learning that the young people were negotiating. So far, we've had over 150 young people engaged in the Evolve programme, and that's in partnership with our 2 high schools and 1 primary school. Gail's here from Castlehead High, and she's one of our great advocates for the programme in that she has asked for the programme to continue for several of the groups and has provided PEF funding once the cashback funding has finished. The sort of activities that the groups that we worked with were involved in were a whole range. Now, these activities were age appropriate, so we were involved with P7 groups and S1 to S4 groups. The young people were a range of young people that were identified by the schools as being particularly vulnerable or just needing that additional support from ourselves as a youth work facility. And the types of activities they were doing were just as said, what they were asking for. So it was things like cooking, shopping on a budget. Some of the girls were doing nail art. We did quite a bit of social action with one of the S1 groups where they used the Place Standards Toolkit and they identified what they wanted to change within their communities and took action there. Linked to all of the activities, we tried as much to accredit it through Duke of Edinburgh, High Five, Dynamic Youth, and where we didn't pick up an accreditation, we were collaborating with the schools to see what kind of accreditation they could do within the schools to gain something of value for the work that they were carrying out. The young people themselves, they gained hugely in confidence. We were able to remove a lot of the barriers for the young people, and they were really quite motivated and engaged. And for some that weren't finding it very easy to attend school, were attending the programme, and I found it really funny. In fact, one of the groups would phone the school to say that they were going to be a wee bit late after school lunch, so they would come along. They would ask for the bus to stay there so that we could pick them up. But we would transport them from the school to one of our local venues. And the reason we did that, we just found it more easy to engage with the young people. They were much more relaxed in an informal youth work environment. The evaluation itself, we did that with the schools through using our own evaluation paperwork. We also used a start and end point form with the young people. We were able to track the P7s when they moved up to S1 and observe the work that they were doing and also look at the portfolios that they were building. There was loads of feedback, which Gail will probably talk to you about, given from parents and staff and the wider community as far as the young people and the impact it was having on them and their progression. The main thing about the inquiry for us was having the time and space for a joint review and being able to evaluate and plan together. The collaborative inquiry, again, it was mentioned earlier about common language. The youth work skills framework was our link with the schools to be able to look at how we were evaluating. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Gail. Sorry, that was a whole load of information there.
No, that's great. Gail, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think it's just going back to that really, it is the relationship was so important. It was really a sort of like we identified pupils and it was really thinking about what kind of impact we wanted to have for those pupils and what kind of things that we were looking for the pupils to do or what kind of things they voiced that they wanted to do. But I think the relationship between Susan and I of it not just being an 8-week programme, like start off and finish, I got an update every week. Was able to feed that back to pupils and their pupil support teachers and their guidance teachers so that they were aware of what they were doing. They felt as if what they were doing really valued. It was recognised in school. So it did really improve their sort of sense of belonging. They did feel empowered. They did get involved in more things at school. So actually a lot of the measures that we put in place about attendance, improved confidence, a lot of it was around sort of social and emotional wellbeing. We actually saw there was so many sort of unintentional consequences of actually been involved in the programme that quite often it wasn't something we were trying to measure, it was something that the pupils had been able to self-evaluate and reflect in themselves, which for me was one of the most powerful things from the programme.
Amazing, thanks very much. So that's just a very kind of brief overview, and I'm going to ask Heather and Michelle to do something similar, just to kind of clarify what the programme at Inverclyde Academy is all about.
Hi there, I'll go first and then Heather can come in. Just to sort of set the scene in Inverclyde, so we work with all 6 of our mainstream secondary schools, and we deliver BGE in senior phase. So we picked Inverclyde Academy for the collaborative inquiry due to the fact that we've actually got a strong and well-established partnership within that school. So we offer BGE in the schools through SAC funding. We've got 3 attainment workers who support that between the 6 secondary schools. At the time of this, we had 2, so we managed to gain another 1. Senior phase is offered through our core team, and it's funded through the core team budget. And what that basically equates to, so at the time of the inquiry, each school got, and Inverclyde Academy got 1 day attainment support for the S1 to S3, and they got 1 day from a different worker delivering senior phase. So the way that then works is discussions begin probably May, June time with ourselves and the staff involved from CLD and the kind of senior management team within the schools, that we start looking at potential participants. We hope to try and meet them before the term actually finishes, so we're ready to start when the new term begins in August. Targeting is done in relation to their level of literacy, numeracy, their attendance, maybe it's families that don't engage. So the BGE work focuses on health and wellbeing, literacy, numeracy, and confidence and self-esteem. And the senior phase work also focuses on that, but it also looks at life skills and life beyond school. And all the work that we undertake, we try to underpin by accreditation if appropriate. And again, that would normally be Dynamic Youth, Youth Achievement Awards, John Muir. We also deliver a variety of SQA awards within the school, Saltire Awards, because at points are involved with volunteering. What we tend to do is once the young people are identified and the groups kind of start, we then have a kind of 4-week sort of bedding in period where the workers will work with the young people and look at everything from team building, relationship building, and at this stage we can try and gain sort of information about the young people to see what types of things that they would like to take part in, so we can tailor the programme to the needs and the things that the young people would actually like to participate in. At that point, when they agree that they're going to take part, they sign a participation agreement, a group agreement, so that everybody's quite clear about moving forward. We then do our sort of pre-evaluation, so we use the Shinari Wellbeing Wheel and look at the health and wellbeing attributes there, so they score themselves against that. They also have logbooks, diaries, and obviously if they're doing the accreditation, they have the paperwork there to fill in. The impact of the work that we do, and it's shown through the collaborative inquiry, is increased confidence, resilience, positive relationships, team building and decision making, and improved leadership. In terms of 90% when we did this achieved some form of accreditation for their learning and participation. Heather, do you want to add anything? Some of the things I should say that the young people take part in as part of the programmes, as I said, team building, there's cooking, we look at volunteering in the community. We've got an English as a second language. One of the groups within the school then decided they were quite isolated. So as part of that, they then worked with one of the CLD workers to establish a youth club in the evenings that they could attend, and other young people from other schools could attend as well. They've been in the Ocean Youth Trust voyages, and they're involved in fundraising, sometimes to raise awareness raise money for the school. They also take part in some of the wider campaigns like the White Ribbon campaign. They support us at the moment. Some of our groups looking at promoting the Scottish Youth Parliament elections. So we try and get them to do some work for us in return for us working with them. Heather, do you want to add anything?
I've not really got anything to add other than in terms of the success of this work with that particular establishment. The school have in the last couple of weeks approached us about funding a dedicated post in addition to what is already in school through the Attainment Challenge and core budgets. We're looking at a dedicated post in Inverclyde Academy. I think that had been there pre-COVID, and I think it's recognised in terms of we've made kind of good progress in terms of work that we used to do there. I think this process has reignited people's kind of enthusiasm and awareness of if you get the partnership right, it can have real kind of benefits for the young people. So Inverclyde Academy are looking to fund a youth work post that will work alongside the attainment post and the senior phase post in the schools, obviously benefiting more young people, hopefully. And just a wee plug that the work Michelle just mentioned there was up for a education award this morning with the New Scots group. So unfortunately they weren't the winners, if you like, but total winners in our eyes. A huge achievement to be a finalist. So yeah.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, congratulations, Michelle. It's real testament to the work. So that's the sort of overview. I'm going to pass across to John because he's got he's going to run a wee interview like we've done in some of the other sessions, just to hear from the practitioners and from Gail from a school perspective. Like, how was that kind of self-evaluation process, John?
Thanks, Joe, and thanks everybody for those kind of introductions. And what we'll maybe do is come back to some of the things that you've touched on in those introductions. But I suppose one of the kind of introductory question that we've asked all of the partners who've been involved in these sessions is, what made you get involved in that collaborative inquiry in the first place? What was it you wanted to find out? So I'll maybe come to Susan and Gail first. So when you get involved in this process, and thinking about that idea of that kind of working together on your shared self-evaluation, what were the kind of things you hope to find out from being involved in the collaborative inquiry? So to Susan and Gail,
really
maybe
about,
first.
Yeah.
So
I think it was really just about sort of finding out about what was actually working, what things were having the positive impact, and it wasn't just about some of the things that the programmes were sort of doing. You know, our pupils did respond well to a different environment, a different setting, but it was really about identifying what things were actually having the biggest impact, so we could replicate them in schools, and so we could provide an environment for them to be able to establish a lot of the skills they'd learned, and really about empowering them to make them realise that these are the skills you have developed, these are the skills that you have identified, and here's how we could start using those in school. I think we're made to be a lot more accountable now about when we're using like PEF money. People want evidence, people want to know what the impact's going to be. So in terms of being involved in the collaborative inquiry, I think somebody sort of previously put into the comment box that it's sometimes quite difficult to measure some of the positive impacts, particularly when it comes to sort of a lot of the social and emotional aspects that are improving. So being involved in the collaborative inquiry was just a sort of a way of us being able to look at how we're going to measure, how we're going to be able to identify, and sort of most importantly, the young people be able to sort of celebrate that and for them to sort of take ownership for their achievements.
thanks, Gail. Susan, have you got anything else to add to that?
I think just to add to that, we did have relationships with the schools. We do work with the schools. However, we were looking at a way of strengthening that partnership, and that's what this collaborative inquiry did. It gave us the time and space to come together, to measure, to plan, and to see if we could do anything in the future that would work for the young people. And importantly, the sustainability, I mean, for ourselves as youth workers, we don't always have the finances available. So we wanted to make that as sustainable as possible and to get that highlighted further up the management tree, to look at how youth work in schools can continue to work collaboratively.
Great, thank you. Michelle and Heather, I'll put that same question to you. I know, Michelle, you had said, you know, you work with all 6 of the secondary schools in Inverclyde, and this was maybe one of the stronger partnerships. That was one of the reasons why you chose it. But what were you hoping to find out from the process?
I think we'd like to just probably very similar to what echo what Gail and Susan said. I think in Inverclyde Academy, we always did think we had really good relationships there. We had really good joint planning, and we did carry out self-evaluation with the young people, and we were very good at doing it with ourselves. And I think before we probably used like our link teacher to do it, but I think this process has actually allowed other teachers within the school to get involved, to see what difference they felt that our work was making to the young people even in the wider school. So that was quite nice, that it wasn't just sort of sitting with the same people, I suppose, looking at the same sort of outcomes and whether we met the targets we were hoping for. So it did give us the opportunity to take it a lot wider within the school, and it did help as well. I think from our point of view, we're getting parents engaged because the schools were sort of on board with that as well, rather than just us kind of contacting parents. So yeah, it was good, and we're part of the next one, which will be interesting because that's with a school that we're just establishing links with. So I think it'll be really good to compare, because we're really at quite a beginning stage with the next one, whereas we did feel going into this that this was quite a strong relationship.
Thanks, Michelle. Anything to add to that, Heather?
Yeah, I think just by the nature of probably the Education Scotland and YouthLink involvement, I think that added a bit of weight and value to the process as well. Just as Michelle said, we've carried out kind of evaluation as what we do. You know, it's probably kind of broadened our horizons a wee bit, as Michelle said, involving more people, casting the net a bit further. But I think in terms of the kind of finished product and the kind of evidence that it kind of generated, we've used that as a kind of foundation in terms of conversation with others, you know, and I think that's helped. That it's, you know, by the very nature that Education of Scotland have been involved in YouthLink, I think it's just added a bit of value and weight for us in a local situation. You know, when we were approached about the kind of second kind of process that Michelle just alluded to there, we had no hesitation from the school to get involved in that, because I think they saw the value. Because schools talk to each other as well, you know, of clearly. So I think that was helpful, and it really became a tool that we could use. Also, as well, let's be honest, we're in an environment where resources are being reduced, particularly in terms of attainment challenge, and it probably made the decision makers think a wee bit before they were making decisions around, you know, what elements they were going to reduce this year, because as we all know, the attainment challenge year on year, it's fairly brutal reductions that the partnerships are working with. So it probably kind of staved off some of that for us, because I think people are able to see the real value. So
Okay, thanks for that. Can I stick with Michelle and Heather for the next one? So we've talked a bit about. Oh, Susan, you've got your hand up. Did you want to add something in just on that score?
Yeah. Just going back to when Lynn McGinn from the West Primary was involved in the collaborative. One of the things that she had mentioned was the delivery of curriculum for excellence, and how the COVID mitigations really impacted on the personalisation and choice. So they weren't, as a school, able to meet that, which is why they were getting involved in this collaboration. Because realistically, with 33 in a class, that couldn't be delivered. So having a youth work approach and working with ourselves really helped them meet their outcomes as well.
Great, thanks for that. Michelle and Heather, you've talked a wee bit already about you know, how you kind of gathered evidence as part of the kind of shared self-evaluation. So I suppose that was one of the things we were really keen to look at, and I suppose we were keen for not asking people to go and start from scratch. So it was about looking at, you know, what evidence you already gathered and whether there are any gaps in that. You talked earlier on already, Michelle, about having quite a clear idea of what the impacts have been on young people at Inverclyde. But what can you say anything? What was your experience of that, kind of looking at data both from a youth work and a schools perspective? What data you had, any gaps that you had, any kind of additional sort of evidence that you gathered along the way?
I think the thing that we don't get access to the CMIS system, so that's been one of the.
Oh,
You've just
you're on
muted
mute, Michelle.
yourself.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying we don't have access to the CMIS system. So one of the things we like to try and see is our work making any difference to attendance, young people coming along? And then sometimes what we actually found through this inquiry was some of the young people are actually coming to our groups and then leaving. They weren't then going on to other things within the school. So I think that was something that the school found quite interesting, that certainly got highlighted as part of the evidence that we gathered. I don't know, Heather? You?
Yeah, I think there was, in terms of gaps, I think certainly in terms of, we did get some kind of data from schools, but it was kind of minimal, John. I think this has enabled us to kind of look at kind of wider impacts in terms of how then young people are able to kind of sustain attendance, you know, but how there maybe that kind of, has it made a difference? And we were part of a conversation yesterday, so probably Jill will laugh at this, the kind of readiness to learn kind of aspect as well, you know, and just in their all round kind of presentation, confidence, you know, ability to remain in school, although there were young people who were only coming in for our kind of provision. I think a big one for us as well was that link with parents, because obviously we've got an interest in terms of, from a CLD thing, about the kind of wider community and where young people are connected into their communities and able to access kind of learning and development opportunities there as well. So I don't think we've cracked that particular nut yet, and that some of the conversations that we're having with schools at the moment as part of the planning process is like about, you know, us not just kind of liaising with parents and carers at the end, but actually being part of this is an opportunity for your young person. You can come along and speak to us as well, and just making it, bringing it alive for them in terms of, well, so what is this? What am I being asked to kind of agree to here? And certainly for the young people as well, that kind of pre-information, because whether we like it or not, there were some young people still turning up to our provision and being like, I don't know why I'm here. I'm not sure about this, and that's completely again to kind of good youth work value principles and values. So there's been things learning within that's come out of evaluation that we can we've learned from, you know. And in terms of the attainment stuff, we are measured quite a bit. We have to provide quite a bit of evidence in terms of attainment, just by the nature of the funding as well, justifying our kind of existence. But we've used some of that and translated that into the senior phase process as well, just in terms of, you know, that we should be doing this anyway, regardless of whether we've been asked by funders or not, you know. So it's been quite a bit of learning for us, isn't it?
Great, thanks for that. Gail and Susan, I'll come back to you, and we'll maybe bring the interview a bit towards a conclusion here, but I'd be interested to know your own reflections are on how going through this kind of shared self-evaluation has maybe had an impact on you know, your own practice and how you might approach that kind of shared self-evaluation in the future. So that one was to Gail and Susan.
Yep, sorry, John. I think as far as shared evaluation, we recognise the value of it. We've seen the difference that it's made to the young people. We do already collect all of that evidence, as has been said, in triplicate, because especially if we're being funded by an external organisation. But yeah, I think just seeing the difference it makes for the young people and having those conversations with the young people and between ourselves, we realise that there probably are more ways of collecting that evidence. Improvements that we recognised early on was to involve the parents, and we weren't at liberty to do that at the start with the COVID restrictions, but the school were. So having that communication with the school was vital.
Great, thanks. And Gail, because you're our sole school-based representative here today, which is fantastic. I know Denise, the head teacher at Inverclyde, has been a strong advocate of this piece of work in other sessions that we've done. But you know, if you were speaking to other head teachers or school colleagues, in terms of that kind of shared self-evaluation with youth work partners, are there things that you would say to them in terms of do's and don'ts or things that you would want them to think about?
First of all, most importantly, do it. It's absolutely like it's paid off. Our pupils have got so much from it, and I think it's about that two-way learning. I would have said previously, I think we've had maybe partners come into the school and deliver something and they go. You know, and that programme's finished. But I would say, in terms of with the inquiry, the self-reflection that we've been involved in, we have self-reflected on attendance. We did see an improvement in attendance after we looked at improvement in attendance, and it does go back to I think it was maybe Hayley that mentioned it, looking at that readiness to learn. It is about that engagement. It is about them being more engaged in their learning, about them being able to identify the improvements that they've made. And I think sometimes in school, although I'm a teacher, and I hate saying this, that the pupils see you as a teacher before they see you as anything else. And I think sometimes the youth workers work in a different context. They provide a different sort of context for learning where pupils can identify the improvements they're making. They do have much more personalisation and choice. You know, it's smaller grouping, so they're not limited to trying to do something that's actually going to meet the needs of 33 people in a class. Our groupings were between like 4 and 12, so there was a bit of discussion. So pupils were able to identify. I've actually got one of the pupil SWOT analyses in front of me where one of the fourth year pupils have said one of their strengths now is being able to negotiate and cooperate. And I don't even think they could have used that kind of terminology. And when you asked them what they meant by that, they could give you the examples. So I think for me, we did some certification in school as well through the Personal Development Award. And the pupils really were able to lead their own learning, and that's something that our fourth year group of pupils couldn't do. They were very passive. They waited and been told an instruction would then go and do something. But you know, when we're talking about maybe say their self and community unit, when they were talking about a lot of the different things that they'd done with Susan and her team, they were able to talk about their strengths and their development needs and what threatened their progress, the actual dialogue, and in terms of, I would say there was depth of learning that they had is something that I would say, you know, if you're looking to improve well-being, but also to be able to sort of recognise that in attainment ways that pupils appreciate, that would be one of my biggest reasons for doing it.
Thanks, Gail, and that's a strong point, I think, maybe to draw this bit to a close. That kind of deep impact on young people, fantastic to hear. And I suppose that point that a few of you have mentioned about looking at the readiness to learn is one of the things that we've learned through the first process, haven't we, Jill? And it's a greater focus certainly on in the second round of the inquiry, looking at gathering evidence about, you know, bringing together the things that may constitute a greater readiness to learn. So listen, thank you very much everybody for sharing your experiences there. That was great to hear, and I'll pass back to you, Jill.
Brilliant. I think we just got, it's just really an opportunity at this point for those guests on the call to ask any questions that they might have. I think we've got quite a small wee group of people on the call today, but if there are questions that people have, it would be great to hear those now. We're a small enough group that we don't need to put stuff in the chat, I don't think, and just you can just speak up, I think. And just also while we're waiting maybe for questions, I'm just to in terms of the partners that are here, also just to clarify that because we're recording these sessions, they will go out to a bigger group of people over time. So it's important, you know, it's important that we record it so that other people have access to these conversations later. If there aren't questions, I think we're probably about there, aren't we, John?
I think so, yeah.
So thanks everybody for participating today. We'll make sure that everybody who signed up for the session has copies of the slides and the recordings, and really appreciate the partners taking the time to be part of the conversation this afternoon. And I hope those that joined found it valuable. Kat? I think Kat might be frozen. So you'll see in the chat there's a link to an evaluation form, and if you can, please could you fill that in before you sign off today. Thanks very much. And thanks everybody. See you soon.
Thanks folks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
I'm a